1, 2, 3, 4.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Top of the hour. Welcome again. Another dynamite hour of the 2021 Virginia Solar Summit. I'm again one of your co-hosts, Dan French. Vince Maiden is out there somewhere. Carrie Staten, our unofficial cruise director, and we are cruising past kind of halftime in our robust solar redevelopment extravaganza over the 3 days this week, and we're kind of pivoting. We've got a really nice flow to our program today, and turning to kind of building on everything that Judy Dunscombe had to share and our last session, and pivoting now into community solar as it's known, but in Virginia, the specific term is shared solar. So put quotes around that. And I want to introduce some of our speakers. I see Miss Carrie Hearn, who has helped organize this session, and actually a lot of our sessions. Her and her folks at DMME have been super helpful plugging into the summit this year. And we've got Mr. Derek Wenger, there he is, hello. Hannah Coman, hello. And let's see, I saw Yesenia as well. My screen's kind of weird here, but I saw Miss Rivera from Solar United Neighbors. And yeah, hey Carrie, do you want to introduce everybody?
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Thank you, Dan.
Yeah, come on in.
I'm just so inspired today by all of these conversations, and it's so comforting for me in particular. I think personally, coming from the state energy office and having worked on solar for the past 18 months and continuing to work on solar, that we have this huge community out there that are, filling in the gaps and working at all of these different angles. So I'm just so appreciative, and, shout outs to everyone who's also joining us on YouTube and here as well. So thank you for having us. We're going to pivot, like you said, to talk about shared solar. This may be known as community solar in many other parts of the country and the world, but in Virginia, we do things the Virginia way, and so we're calling it shared solar. And there's a little bit of history on that naming convention that we may have time to dig into today. But before we get into it, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speakers. And myself as well. So again, my name is Carrie Hearn. I am the Associate Director of Energy Equity Programs at the Virginia State Energy Office, the Department of Mines, Minerals, and Energy. And I am joined today by a really wonderful group of experts on this topic. I came to know many of these folks through the stakeholder engagement process that we at DMME are co-facilitating with the State Corporation Commission on how this shared solar program develops in Virginia. So the legislation was passed on this program for both shared solar and multifamily shared solar in the 2020 legislative session. And now it is in the State Corporation Commission process around the rulemaking and gathering stakeholder input, in particular around how low-income communities can benefit through shared solar. So in terms of our team, I'm going to ask each of you to turn on your video and come off mute as I say your name, so that people can put a name to the face, or a face to the name. So Charlie Coggenshall, say hello for us.
Yep. Hi, everybody. I'm Charlie Coggenshall. I work with the Coalition for Community Solar Access, which is the trade association representing much of the community solar industry across the country. And I lead the Virginia regulatory work and California work, along with several national initiatives for CCSA.
Excellent. And Charlie is down in the great city of Asheville, North Carolina. I've got lots of family down there. So Excellent location in the country. Okay, and then we're going to go to Hannah Coman. I actually work really closely with Hannah on the Clean Energy Advisory Board, which was established to help advise DMME on creating a pilot program for financing solar energy in low to moderate income households across Virginia. And I learned from Hannah's bio that she was a Fulbright scholar in Germany working on renewable energy policy. Hannah, tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Carrie. So my name is Hannah Coman. I'm currently Associate General Counsel at Apex Clean Energy here in Charlottesville. And I also then am chair of the Clean Energy Advisory Board, where I work closely with Carrie and a lot of the other people here on the panelists and attendees. Yeah, and I've been interested in renewable energy policy since college, which that's what led me on the Fulbright and then law school. So thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Excellent. Thank you, Hannah. And next we're going to go to Yesenia Rivera, who's the Director of Energy, Equity, and Inclusion with Solar United Neighbors, known as SUN. And SUN has been doing amazing work in Virginia and across the country, helping with the distributed generation and community solar space, and has a great background. So Yesenia, tell us about yourself.
Hi, Carrie. I apologize because my computer decided to act up right now and my camera is not working. So I apologize for that. But yeah, I've been in community development for about 10 years now. I got hooked in law school. I was part of the community development clinic at the University of the District of Columbia. Started working with low to moderate income families across the district. Eventually that led me to solar. Through housing counseling and seeing the effect the foreclosure crisis had on folks, where even if we could save them and get them a mortgage modification, their utility bills were still out of control. And it just led me down this pathway to see what else was there and how we could help. And that's how I got to solar and SUN.
Excellent. We're so glad to have you working on this space in the whole region. So thank you for taking time today and in the stakeholder process. Okay, so next we'll go to Derek Wenger, who works with Dominion Energy and is doing a lot of efforts around helping Dominion Energy execute on their grid transformation plan. And as a graduate of Christopher Newport University. So Derek, tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Sure, yeah, and thanks again for having me. Looking forward to the discussion. Derek Wenger, I'm a strategic advisor of grid solutions for Dominion Energy. Been involved on the electric distribution side of the business for going on 13 years now. And I spent the last 4 basically focused on small scale renewable energy and distributed generation projects, which doesn't sound like a lot of time, but within that scope of responsibility, when I joined in 2017, we were interconnecting about 40 new net metering installations per month, as compared to about 600 last month. And we seem to break that record just about every month now. So a lot's happened in a short period of time, and I've had the benefit, I think, of focusing in this area to really be a part of the expansion and growth that we've seen. So it's been exciting and even more exciting times ahead, I think.
Yeah, and I think we'll have continued educational opportunities in your space for many months and years to come. I think as this rolls out across the state, people are having more questions and really understanding the nuances of it, and appreciate your work to help educate people to understand how it impacts their bills and how they can interpret all of the details, because there's so much there. So switching from net metering to virtual net metering, as shared solar can be called, let's go ahead and bring up our slides, and I'll turn it over to, I go into Charlie first.
Sure. And should I go ahead and manage the slides? I think that was, is that right? Yeah.
I think that's what we're doing. And
Okay.
We've got Kelsey as a backstop if we have any issues.
Okay. Let's start here.
And Yesenia, I'm sorry, we can't see your beautiful face, but we can hear you.
At least you can hear me. That's the good part.
Yes.
Beautiful voice. You can't see me now.
And while Charlie's bringing this up, I just want to mention that, we've been working with the State Corporation Commission almost going on a year now, maybe since last summer, in providing various recommendations and in the full public process. And as that proceeded, we helped launch a group in December, and then earlier this year we launched this low-income stakeholder work group, which is where a lot of these folks have been contributing. So really appreciate Charlie's efforts in contributing to that group from the Coalition for Community Solar Access. So take it away, Charlie.
Okay, great. So I think, assuming everybody can see the slides now, it says shared solar programs.
Yes.
So you've met thank you, Carrie, you've met the panelists. And what we're going to do is give you kind of an brief overview of just community solar or shared solar in general. And then dive into kind of what it means for Virginia and what sort of programs are getting going as we speak. And I'll give an explanation of one component. Hannah will give an explanation of another component. Yesenia will talk about an aspect of kind of the low income aspect of the shared solar program that I'll be talking about. And then Derek will kind of round it out with giving some of the utility input on project registration and some of the processes around that. So as we're going to talk about it today, shared solar is rooted in the kind of following concept, which I think that this diagram is useful in demonstrating. Participants can buy into a larger solar system, which is typically not located on their property. And then the system sends all of its generation to the grid, which is operated by the utility. And then in turn, the utility provides credits to the customer's electric bill associated with their share, the customer's share of the solar system's generation. And I think it's noteworthy that the uniqueness of shared solar is that it can leverage economies of scale, and larger solar systems are a lot cheaper to build than smaller systems, while also optimizing the location and configuration to maximize solar production. It allows participants to take advantage of those benefits, but maybe more importantly, it allows renters and individuals or businesses that don't own the property or have the right kind of property to host a solar system, or simply don't want to put a solar system on the roof to take part in the cost and benefits of an actual solar system. So because of those benefits, shared solar has been noticed by industry, customers, and decision makers. And it's really become one of the hottest, fastest growing segments of the solar industry, which is saying something. NREL and SEIA estimate that their National Renewable Energy Laboratory and the Solar Energy Industry Association, it's NREL and SEIA, estimate that there are about 2,500 megawatts installed currently, or 2.5 gigawatts, across at least 40 states. And many of these are co-ops and smaller utilities, but the greatest growth over the past several years have been driven by programs through investor-owned utilities, which are typically, they're not always, a product of state policies. And as I've alluded, there are many shapes and sizes for shared solar. The most common term typically used is community solar. However, community distributed generation, solar gardens, shared renewables, and like the other names are out there. And there can be different types. Some markets are entirely led by and owned by utilities, while others are enable third parties, and they're community-driven projects to be developed whereby the utility may play a role in receiving the energy and providing the bill credit, but would not be the primary point of contact for a customer that has a share in the project. The latter, which is kind of the more competitive model, I will say, is what kind of CCSA members, my trade association members, are most interested in. And it's also kind of what we're talking about today. The kind of more diverse model that involves third parties, those are the kind of programs that were recently approved in Virginia. So there are two types that we're focusing on in this webinar, two types of shared solar. One, both respond, I should say, by legislation and regulations over the past year. The shared solar program gets underway this summer on July 1st with the opportunity for subscriber organizations to apply for licenses and submit project registration applications. That said, Dominion will still need to complete a customer information platform before customers can actually enroll. So you or whomever, if you're a customer, might not actually see kind of these projects and this program kind of in real life operating for another year or two. Dominion has until July 2023 to kind of provide that community solar platform or customer platform, or the program will just start enrolling customers regardless. The multifamily shared solar program gets fully underway this July 2020. It doesn't have kind of additional steps involved that might sort of slow it down. Technically, it could be off and running, as soon as this summer. Importantly, these should not be confused with Virginia's community solar pilot program, which are or will be utility-led programs from Dominion and Appalachian Power. It's also separate from electric co-ops, which can and have been established in Virginia. And I can't give you much details on those other programs other than to say that they exist, and they're not what we're kind of focused on today. So briefly, I'll talk about the basics of the shared solar program. So this is not the multifamily shared program, it's the shared solar program. So this is only going to be offered in Dominion Energy territory. The program is initially limited to 150 megawatts, but can and will be increased by another 50 megawatts once it meets its low-income participation target. As a kind of reference point, one estimate, or at least by one estimate, about 110 homes could be powered by a megawatt. So if all 200 megawatts get built, it could be enough to meet the energy supply needs of about 22,000 homes. The actual number could vary depending on the subscription size of the customer. The shared solar program caps project sizes at 5,000 kilowatts or 5 megawatts on an individual parcel of land. So there could actually be a grouping of projects on a parcel of land as long as it doesn't add up to 5 megawatts or exceed 5 megawatts, or a single project on a parcel of land up to 5 megawatts. It also needs to be on the transmission system. So these are not kind of, utility transmission level interconnected projects. Importantly, the capacity of the project cannot all go to one large commercial customer. At least 40% must be set aside for small subscription sizes of 25 kilowatts or less. 25 kilowatts is typically about the size of a small commercial entity. Residential customers are typically about 10 kilowatts or less. In addition, 30% of project capacity must go toward low-income customers, which will be discussed more by Yesenia on the next slide. The primary kind of program economic elements are a minimum bill and a credit rate. The minimum bill is currently in the process of being determined. It's something that a subscriber will need to pay to the utility, Dominion, in order to participate in the program. The intent behind this is to cover some of the costs of the program or of the utility's operations or infrastructure that the customer would otherwise be avoiding due to receiving the bill credits. The bill credit rate is essentially the retail rate for the respective customer. What's not really provided here in this slide are the subscription costs, which would be determined between the subscriber organization and the customer. And there's a lot of different ways that those kind of relationships work, and we could maybe talk about this more during the Q&A. But the most common kind of business model typically involves a contract between a subscriber organization and the customer, whereby the customer passes back a portion of the bill credit rate to the subscriber organization while keeping the remaining portion as a savings that can be applied against their electricity costs. And again, we can talk more about that during the Q&A portion. So now I'm going to pass it over to Yesenia to talk about the low-income portion, which, as I mentioned, comprises 30% of every project's capacity, which is significant for any program, but really is one of the leading kind of most ambitious, I'd say, requirements on the low-income front for community solar in the country.
Thank you, Charlie.
I'll give it to you, Yesenia.
Thanks. So as Charlie mentioned, there is a low-income participation component to the Share Solar program. And what do we mean by low income? So who qualifies? In this case, any person or household in Dominion territory that earns 80% or less of the area median income. And that's going to vary by region, county, city. So for example, a family of 4 lives in Richmond qualifies if they earn $71,500 a year or less, but a family of 4 that lives in Norfolk would qualify only if they earn less than $66,000 a year. So, and it depends on the number of people in the household and where you are. Second, there's also a requirement or an exception for low-income service organizations. And these are organizations or groups that are non-residential utility customers and serve, or their mission is to serve, low-income individuals and families. So if they're in a low-income census tract or their primary consumers or clients are low to moderate income families, they would qualify for the LMI exception to the minimum bill requirement. Now, why share solar? Why the focus on low income? 34% of Virginia households are renters. 10% of the state lives in poverty. And that means that the energy burdens for renters, for low-income families, is quite significant. For example, a family that lives at around 100% AMI only has a 2% energy burden, where if you look at the other end of the spectrum, you look at families that live between the 0 and 30% AMI, their energy burden is 17%. This program can help eliminate barriers to access solar. You don't need to be a homeowner. And even if you are a homeowner, if your roof is not good enough for solar because it's not in good condition, because you live in a shaded neighborhood, you can still benefit from solar energy. And with that kind of energy burden, it's very important that we create more mechanisms to access, to take down these barriers so that folks can actually start seeing some savings in their bill and reduce that energy burden. Because 30% of the program's capacity is set aside specifically for low-income households, we can see that it's going to make a difference, or we hope that it's going to make a difference in their bills and help them start save, so they don't have to be choosing between paying their electric bill, putting food on the table, trying to jump between the mortgage or the rent and the utility bills. Thankfully, there's no minimum solar bill for the low-income household. So even if they participate in the program, they're not subjected to the minimum bill that Dominion is going to impose on market rate customers. It does create a pathway for these low-income households to access and benefit from solar energy like everyone else. One of the biggest criticisms of this transition to solar is that so far not everyone has access to solar. The SHARE program is looking to change that dynamic, to make sure that regardless of your homeownership status, regardless of whether you can financially afford it or not, you can have access and benefit from solar energy. For low-income organizations or organizations serving low-income households, this can be very important because those extra savings mean that they can actually offer maybe some more after-school programs. They can increase the range of their food pantry. They can actually serve more folks with those savings. So at the end of the day, we're hoping that this puts us on the path to equity and make sure that in this transition to solar and this transition to clean energy, we're making sure it's a just and equitable transition. And I'm going to hand it over to Hannah.
Thanks, Yesenia. Charlie, can you, thanks. So I'm going to talk about the multifamily shared solar program. And again, just kind of go over the basics. Charlie talked about the shared solar program, and this is the multifamily shared solar program, which was passed through legislation, separate legislation from the shared solar program, but the same year. So the multifamily shared solar program will be open in Dominion's territory and in far southwestern and in the far southwestern part of the state, in which Kentucky Utility operates under the name of Old Dominion Power, which I refer to as ODP. So it will only be open to Dominion and ODP customers who live in multifamily housing, such as apartments or condos. And the solar facility needs to be developed on the premises of or adjacent to those customers. So it's essentially on-site solar, and that is a big difference between the multifamily shared solar program and the shared solar program. So if you live in an apartment building and a solar developer reaches an agreement with the owner of that property and they build a solar facility, you can then subscribe for the electricity generated from that facility. At least 3 subscribers from your building must also sign up. So, sorry, 3 inclusive of you. So 2 others. And you cannot subscribe for more than the number of kilowatt hours that you would use on an average annual basis. So based on the previous year. In terms of program size, there's no cap, which is great. But of course, there are kind of certain requirements that limit how many projects could be established. The facility cannot be larger than 3,000 kilowatts at a single location and 5,000 kilowatts at contiguous locations owned by the same entity. Again, it has to be at the premises or adjacent to the multifamily building, and it has to be connected to the distribution system. For the also for the participant requirement, one real big difference between the multifamily and the shared solar program is that the multifamily doesn't have a low income participation carve out. So we don't have that 30% or the low income eligibility. But the idea would be that this would still be economically viable for people and would save people money on their bills. So although it's not specifically focused on low income customers, I think that it could be very attractive to low income customers if, again, it shows economic savings. And just to point out kind of where this program is available is in Dominion's territory in far southwestern Virginia. And the poverty rates in far southwestern Virginia are relatively high compared to the rest of the state. So I think this is going to be a very important program. Most of the attention, though, has been on the shared solar program that's just in Dominion's territory. This multifamily shared solar program may be a bit tougher to get going because of the size requirements and the fact that it has to be on the premises. It just makes it more complicated for the siting and the interconnection, and you have to work with a lot of different parties that have different interests. So it's going to require organization of the people living in the multifamily facility, as well as the property owner, the subscriber organization, solar developer, and the utility. That's going to be a lot of work, but I think it can be done. The process just may take some time. And again, going down to the economics, I mentioned that the economics should result in savings for the customers. The legislation and the final regulations state that there will be an administrative charge that will be determined by the commission based on the incremental costs of administering the program. And then there will also be an applicable bill credit rate that will be determined by the commission. And the legislation states that that bill credit shall be set such that the shared solar program results in robust project development and shared solar program access for all customer classes. So the commission right now hasn't set forth what these charges or the bill credits will be. Hopefully that will come soon. It's hard to know, this project, like Charlie says, opens up this summer. And so we'll have to figure out the economics in order to kind of get this up and running. So hopefully the commission will address this soon. I'll pass it now off to Derek, who's going to talk about Dominion's perspective.
Yeah, thanks, Hannah. I was going to talk a little bit about the registration process for any qualifying facilities and just how that kind of starts and then finishes with respect to the project reaching commercial operation, generating power, and subsequent credits to subscribers of the program. So first off, from a project registration perspective, it should say each subscriber organization. I just noticed that prior to the meeting, but effectively the solar developer or an administrative partner that solar developer may be working with pursuant to the program will submit an interconnection request very much as they would today for a small generator interconnect project, whether it was in participating in this program or not. So that interconnection application process will look and feel much the same. There are just obviously a couple additional steps to ensure that the capacity of that facility is truly awarded and recorded for public viewing for participation in this program, just given the requirements of the program that the panel has already discussed. So what that will include really is just the subscriber organization providing their entity name and who they're doing business as, and proof of license to do business pursuant to this program, and the rulemaking process and the rules adopted by the commission that Carrie mentioned on the top of this call kind of lay out what that process looks like. Obviously, the facility name and location, just so that it's very clear what project we're talking about and where the facility will be located, so that the company can ensure that any production from that facility corresponds to the credits that will be administered. And then finally, a copy of the executed interconnection agreement. And I believe there's also a requirement for just any of the other state or local permits required for that project will be provided at the time as well. So if all of those conditions are met and that information is secured, Dominion Energy within 30 days will follow up with that subscriber organization or solar developer to either award them capacity in the program or let them know if they are on the wait list, depending on where the program sits with respect to the 150 megawatt cap or 200 megawatt cap, depending on kind of which tier we're in at that point in time. So at that point, assuming the facility is awarded capacity, the interconnection process continues. Or if the project is waitlisted, I think it's at that point really just a decision for the developer whether they want to pursue other options for that facility or truly wait and see if capacity will eventually be awarded, either when the program is expanded or something happens to one of those other projects. Once the project actually reaches commercial operation, I think 60 days prior to that date, it's requested that the subscriber organization simply provides the list of enrolled customers at that point in time and their subscription levels, so that Dominion can begin initiating the billing processes behind the scenes to ensure that the credits flow as close as possible to the facility actually generating power. So there's still some specifics to be worked out, I think, between us and stakeholders as to how exactly that transition will work. But more or less, that's what the process will look like. And then on an ongoing basis, that list will be provided from the solar developer to Dominion Energy with respect to any new enrollments or any changes to existing customer enrollments, so that we can make sure that the credits are current and updated and flowing properly to customers throughout the duration of their individual agreement, or obviously the facility itself. So from a customer perspective, what this will look like is obviously there will be an agreement with the subscriber organization for their subscription to a specific facility of their choice. That, for a simplified example, let's assume that was for 500 kilowatt hours of a subscription or an equivalent subscription. Basically, Dominion will apply the bill credit rate that was previously discussed to that 500 kilowatt hours of consumption and credit their Dominion Energy bill with that corresponding amount to basically offset, if you will, any charges that they would have otherwise paid to Dominion Energy if they weren't participating in the program. And I think I mentioned already kind of the data exchange, but again, on a monthly basis, Dominion Energy will get an update of any of that information for new enrollments that have dropped off, and we'll keep and maintain reporting that is obviously will be maintained by Dominion Energy, but shared both with the State Corporation Commission and any of the subscriber organizations, to make sure that we're all kind of working from the same data set with respect to any customer questions that may arise, or just ensuring that our progress to the cap and low income subscription levels are always current and known by all the parties that obviously have an interest in that information. So with that, we try to cover the basics. Obviously, there's a lot of specifics with a program like this, especially new programs that we're all kind of, I guess, learning a little bit as we go, how this is going to work in Virginia. Luckily, we have the benefit of a pretty robust stakeholder group that Carrie and others have mentioned and participated in, where we're looking to leverage best practices across the industry, just given this isn't necessarily a new concept, albeit somewhat new for Virginia. So hopefully we'll continue to leverage opportunities like this to keep everyone aware and abreast of any changes as we go. But otherwise, happy to answer any questions with the remaining time that we have.
Great. Thank you all so much. That was super helpful. And we've had a lot of questions rolling in, and I had some of my own prepared in advance as well. So I think we'll have a lot of time to answer these questions. And while we have you, Derek, we mentioned the minimum bill, and per the regulation, Dominion was to file their proposal for the minimum bill on March 1st. Just a couple weeks ago. So I'm wondering if you'd be willing to help summarize what was in your filing, and then we may have a follow-up question there. Is that something that you're
Sure? Yeah, we did file. Absolutely. Yes, we did file that on March 1st, and we tried to leverage just some of the closest precedent that we had. We didn't obviously have programs that mimic this per se, but we had a few to draw on just based on prior commission rulings that we tried to maintain consistency with. So at the highest level, the minimum bill proposal that we filed is essentially looking for equitable recovery of the wires charges, to put simply, or kind of the delivery charges, if you will, associated with any participating customers. Thinking about it at the highest level, any participating customer, given this will be off-site solar, will still be served by the wires that basically connect to either the multifamily complex, or I guess the better example is the shared solar facility, to their home or their business and wherever they reside, both before their subscription and after. So effectively, and whether it's a storm restoration kind of example or just continuous maintenance of those facilities, we will obviously still maintain and have an obligation to serve any and all customers, whether they're participating in a shared solar program or not. So really, at the highest level, the minimum bill is looking for basically the recovery of the components of our rates today that are attributable to the wires charges, and less around the specific energy or generation charges that they would otherwise be billed, given they will have somewhat of a dedicated source, off-site solar source, pursuant to this program.
All right. Thank you for detailing that. And I know this is a really critical part of the program design to make sure it works for all parties involved, and that the economics pencil out for everyone. Obviously the low income customers are protected from that minimum bill, but for everyone else, it still has to pencil out and make sense in terms of, developing a robust market and be competitive in Virginia. So I'm curious if anyone else has perspective on the minimum bill piece, if you want to weigh in, and if not, we can go to the next question.
No, I think you hit the nail on the head, Carrie. I think that's like our perspective is that the program needs to work, and so there's a balance there that has to be achieved for project economics. Because even if low-income customers don't have to pay the minimum bill, if there's no projects available, then nobody participates. And I think that the legislation and the legislators made it clear that they want the program to be successful and work. So I'm optimistic that we'll get a resolution that balances everybody's interest and tries to meet the needs of all the parties involved.
And Charlie, is the minimum bill component something that is unique to Virginia, or is that common across other programs?
That's a good question. I'd say it's pretty unique. There are other programs that have something somewhat similar, but usually, you know, there's in some cases there's sort of like a program administration charge that's covering sort of just the incremental cost of the program, or you know, a more sophisticated kind of credit rate that's supposed to be already kind of predetermined to say, okay, this is the cost that it has on the utility and other ratepayers, but this is the cost that's needed for projects to work. And so it might just be built into the credit rate. But there's a pretty good variety. I'd say generally there's not a minimum bill charge out there, but you know, I think that sort of concept, it sort of all flows with the same idea of wanting to make it work for the projects and the customers and have savings, but also being cognizant of cost shift and utility, you know, cost recovery. So it's just a different way of hitting it.
Okay, great.
And
a question for
sorry, Carrie, may I just add for the just for the multifamily, there's a separate docket, and Dominion, as it sounds like people know, Dominion made a filing March 1st in the shared solar docket. In the multifamily docket, no such filing was required. So it kind of remains to be seen how the commission will figure out what the cost of administering the program, the incremental cost of administering the program will be. So just wanted to throw that out there.
Okay, great. Thank you for that, Hannah. A question for Yesenia. What do you see as some of the biggest obstacles to getting low-income customer enrollment and ensuring that that's beneficial to those customers and that we can meet the minimum so that the program expands and provides more opportunities for even more customers?
Yeah, great question. From working with other programs across the country, I think the biggest issue is building trust, especially with low to moderate income families. They've heard this kind of sales pitch before. It normally does not end well for them. So there has to be a lot of education around what the program is, who's actually involved in the program, make sure they're not being taken advantage by third parties that are not part of the shared solar program. So education is key. So you can build that trust and you can start building that pipeline. Also, it helps where there's a meaningful financial benefit for them. They're not going to go through the hassle of signing up and having separate bills for the credits and figuring that out if they're not seeing a savings that makes sense to them. So the finances of the projects are important. How much the family save is important. And when you start recruiting, I think it's the biggest key, because you don't want to start recruiting too early, because again, it goes back to the trust issue. You start recruiting 6-8 months before the project is actually ready to go. You're going to have people sitting there for 6-8 months thinking this is a scam, this is not real, and they're going to be talking to their friends and their families and their neighbors about, don't trust this, not real. I've been signed up for 8 months, 9 months, nothing's happening. So be mindful of when you start actually building that pipeline, so that you want to have enough time to do the income qualification and make sure that you have enough folks to actually launch and get the development money, but you don't want to start too soon because people are not going to trust it.
Yeah, that's a great point. There are some questions around the timelines around the different programs. So, it's been mentioned that the multifamily program will become available much more quickly. And those are smaller projects on the rooftops or on the grounds of these condos or apartment buildings. And so we could see those rolling out potentially as early as later this year, I believe. And I'm curious in terms of the timing for the shared solar program, where they could be up to 5 megawatts and off-site, maybe a little bit more out of sight, out of mind. Charlie, can you again remind us some of the key components of the timeline that maybe a developer should be considering for these next couple of months? And then looking ahead to maybe a question for Derek around what are the things that you all are really working on to get that customer facing platform in place? And when could we actually see, something become available to customers in Dominion territory? So start with Charlie.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I think it could be somewhat misleading, to sort of say the program's launching on July 1st. I think the only people that know that the program's launching on July 1st are not the only people. Mostly it's the developers, because the licensing for subscriber organization application opens on that day, but also the project registration application submission does as well. We're actually interested in kind of pushing the registration date out a few months so that there's a staggered sequenced approach of letting everyone get licensed and then kind of having a level playing field to apply for projects. But the idea is, these projects can take a couple of years to really come to fruition. You do have to have a lot of your ducks in a row to submit a project registration application. You have, as Derek mentioned, you have to have an interconnection agreement, you have to have your non-ministerial permits, and those things can take time. So a lot of projects have already been under development up to this point, and there's folks that, assuming they have met those requirements, they're kind of eager to submit their project application and get in the queue, because generally across the country, these community solar programs have been highly competitive, and they usually fill up quite fast. So that said, that's the kind of developer's perspective of they want to get ready as soon as possible. There is kind of some outline questions there of project economics. We don't know necessarily, we haven't definitively seen kind of the credit rate. We haven't seen necessarily what the minimum bill is going to be. And there's a lot of uncertainty there that has to get balanced, the kind of risk. But then the big sort of outstanding element that will hold things up until projects can really get kind of rolling and enrolling customers, as Yesenia is talking about. It's mostly, I'd say, in Dominion's hands. It's partly in the developer's hands of getting through construction milestones and building the project out. But right now there's this customer information platform that Dominion's going to build out, which is great. That's going to help kind of smooth the process of bill crediting, potentially having net crediting. And they have until July 2023 to complete that. So they've got 2 years basically to complete that. If they don't complete it by that time, customer enrollment can begin regardless. But if they complete it ahead of that time, then it can start sooner. So this is a kind of a challenge, another challenge I'd say for developers in trying to line up interconnection milestone requirements versus sort of not knowing exactly when the project will be able to start receiving revenue. And so that's a challenge. But yeah, so timeline's a good question.
Yeah. So Derek, will you be sort of giving people maybe progress updates along the way to, if it's going to be faster than July of 2023, people will have a heads up to plan around customer acquisition, et cetera?
Yeah, that's our goal. And we will, the customer information platform replacement, if you will, is a component of our grid transformation filing, which you mentioned. That's kind of one of the main focal areas of mine. And we have the opportunity to provide kind of an annual update or filing with respect to those initiatives. So that inherently will be probably the most detailed update that is largely publicly available. So that will be a forum for that kind of conversation. But obviously in parallel to that, we've had a series of stakeholder conversations and series around various topics, and we plan to continue to do that. So it's our goal to get that information in the hands of a lot of obviously folks that are likely participating in this summit, as well as the panelists here. So that we'll use multiple forums to kind of get that information out. But I can assure you, it's in our interest and our customers' best interest to have that functionality available as soon as possible. The efficiencies it provides for us internally are cannot be overstated, as well as the information preferences and just the ability to do business and simplify that process for our customers.
Yeah.
Will be much easier than it is today. So we will definitely, we're not going to rush it per se, but the sooner the better, I think, from our perspective.
From everyone's perspective.
So right now that is slated for kind of the front half of 2023. And we hope to get it out as soon as possible.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to keep us rushing along because we've got so many great questions, and I think there's a lot of curiosity around this new program in Virginia. It's opening up a whole new market for developers and, you know, potential customers across the Commonwealth. So I'd like to turn to Hannah and maybe put you on the spot a little bit in terms of your work on the Clean Energy Advisory Board and how you as a board chair have contributed to this process, both, you know, some of the board comments last year in the State Corporation Commission public comment process, and then this year with the low income stakeholder work group.
Yeah, thanks, Carrie. I should be more prepared for this than I am, I guess, knowing you. Yeah, just the Clean Energy Advisory Board, like Carrie said in my introduction, is really focused on creating a program through a fund that would provide funds or a rebate for customers across Virginia, and could be in any territory, to use it for solar. And we're focused on single family homes for that. But as Charlie talked about, and Yesenia, community solar and shared solar is really important to opening up accessibility to solar outside of getting solar on your own roof. So the Clean Energy Advisory Board has really seen this as part of their mission, because it opens up solar to low income customers as well. So we filed comments in July in both the shared solar and the multifamily solar dockets, and then again in November, really stressing how important it is to have viable programs that open up solar to customers, low-income customers, and then for the multifamily, just customers generally that wouldn't be able to access solar otherwise. And then as part of that, we've continued our involvement. I've been active in the stakeholder process, and we are looking forward to finding other ways to really try to make a difference and push the envelope into making equity a really big part of solar in Virginia. And I think actually, Carrie, I'm really excited about your new position at DMME. I don't know if you've had the opportunity to talk about that. I think you were a speaker earlier, but it's really great to see equity becoming a bigger part in the policy discussion here in Virginia.
Yeah, I would say the biggest piece here is maximizing our tools to implement energy efficiency first and foremost, in terms of creating that really safe and healthy and energy efficient building envelope to reduce those energy bills. And then adding renewable energy either on site or through shared solar subscriptions that can further reduce those bills and lock in low clean energy rates for decades to come. And then beyond that, looking at other programs such as the percentage of income payment plan and other programs across the state through the LIHEAP program that's operated under Department of Social Services, the new RGGI funded low income energy efficiency program for affordable housing. All of these tools are other backstops to really help people reduce their energy burden. And of course, as we know, during times like COVID, these are bills that are stacking up or going unpaid. And so it's also to the benefit of the utility to have these programs in place to ensure that customers can keep paying those bills consistently, you know, for the long term. So I think they're win-win programs across the board, and we're excited to have the resources from the federal Department of Energy as well in terms of prioritizing equity throughout. And, we need everyone on board. We need all communities to be able to engage. And we, in terms of comments and things that we hear, all communities want to be engaged, and they want to be part of the solution to climate programs and climate solutions. And these are ways that we can help everyone, help the state and the world at large, just to get cheesy, meet our, challenges of what we're experiencing on the planet. So I'm going to turn to maybe a couple more technical questions for Derek, and I'm just going to go until Dan brings the hook and pulls us off the stage.
We're good till the top of the hour. This is bonus time. If anybody isn't plugged in for the questions, they probably already stood up by now. So please, we got so many questions for this. Keep going.
Yeah, and we'll circle back in the expert session later this afternoon, and we'll also follow up afterwards for any questions that go unanswered, and put those in the knowledge binder. So for Derek, a couple more questions here from, I think probably from some savvy developers, and I'll just throw them all out there and you can kind of pick and choose. The first is, could a developer build a project in a co-op territory for those co-ops that are buying their power from Dominion? So kind of what's the interplay in terms of where the project has to be located? Is there an opportunity there? And then I'll just give you a second question around plans to provide your hosting capacity map as an accessible layer rather than a map. So I'm not exactly sure about that question, but you may know more.
Sure, yeah, for the co-op question, this is a program that's specific to Dominion Energy customers, meaning they receive a Dominion Energy bill, and the facilities themselves have to be located within the Dominion Energy service territory. So unfortunately, at least right now, to my knowledge, not available to co-ops. Obviously for this program, I'm not sure if there's plans for similar programs, obviously from the co-op side of things.
And Derek, can I just add, right, you're exactly right. And I just want to say that co-ops actually have the opportunity, they can implement community solar on their own without legislation. So for example, Bark is a co-op in Virginia that offers community solar. So if somebody's interested in doing that in a co-op territory, they need to talk to the co-op, and they can.
Exactly, I appreciate that. And with respect to our hosting capacity platform, if you will, we launched that just recently, and I think most everyone on the summit here is familiar with the concept of hosting capacity. But right now, ours is I'd say it's an initial version of what we hope to improve upon going forward. So right now, it is somewhat of a static map. Our goal as we get more advanced metering infrastructure deployed, as well as intelligent grid devices that can kind of provide voltage information at a much more granular level than we have today. Obviously, that data is pretty critical in us getting even more dynamic with our hosting capacity abilities. So our goal, again, was to get a map out there that's hopefully helpful for developers to at least pinpoint general areas of opportunity and streamline the process of either land acquisition or, again, just giving them a better idea of where to focus or maybe areas to stay away from that would lead to high cost interconnection projects. So we hear you. I'm looking forward to improving upon what we have, and we look forward to doing that.
Great. Okay, this is a question for Charlie. Anecdotally, I remember when Neil Young was going to be hosting a concert out in, I think it was in Oregon when I lived out in Portland, and it opened and closed in about 7 seconds. So what is your bet or prediction in terms of how fast this will become sort of, at capacity in terms of the allocation to developers? And, beyond that, do you think there's a Is 150 megawatts the right size? I guess 200 megawatts at its capacity. Like, what are your thoughts around growing the program? Should we just start with what we have, or should we already start working on expanding the program?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good questions. So I think that what Virginia has done well is having a pretty high bar for projects to get in. Like I mentioned before, interconnection agreement, non-municipal permits, like those are significant investment kind of levels, I'd say, for a developer, and timing investments. Like it could take you a year potentially to get those in hand, and you need those to get awarded capacity in the program. So I think it's to be seen, to be determined. We don't know. I don't know exactly. The Dominion interconnection queue is not transparent, not available publicly, so we don't know exactly where folks are, what it's going to look like on day one. You know, if it starts July 1 or October 1, as I mentioned, our interest to push it out a few months, even pushing it out a few months, I'm not sure if it will fill up immediately on day one. I know that there's enough interest and probably enough sort of applications in Dominion's interconnection queue to easily fill it up. I just don't know if how many of them will actually have interconnection agreements and all their permits in hand at that point. It's really hard to tell. And as a trade association rep, like I'm not allowed to competitively, we don't talk about that amongst the members. That's sort of, you know, trade secret kind of information for people to say kind of where they are, what they have and where they are in development. So it's to be seen, but just based on experience from other markets, and the sense that I get, sort of the energy I get from our committee here in Virginia, CCSA's committee, there's a lot of interest. And so, as I say, I think there's plenty in the interconnection queue, but I don't know kind of if it'll all be ready on day one or not.
Great.
And the second question on the size, like I think 150 megawatts is pretty modest, 200 megawatts, that's pretty modest. So definitely there's an interest from industry to expand that. It's maybe a kind of a reasonable starting point, but my understanding is legislation is going to be needed to expand it.
Thanks,
That's
Charlie.
correct.
Yeah, thank you, Carrie. Unfortunately, that has to be the last word. Terrific. I wish we had more time. You guys are all free to come back in our Q&A wrap. We're going to carry those conversations over into the knowledge binder. We're going to give our speakers and presenters a chance to answer them in written format, as we will all of our sessions. Excuse me. Just as a general reminder, you can keep those questions coming. And really terrific stuff. I just triple underscore almost everything that absolutely everything that I just heard in the last session. Thank you all for the work that you're doing. Keep going forward. This is like such an important piece, the mechanics of how we do this solar boom right. It's a repeatable model. That's why you see these programs flowering up everywhere. It's inclusive, it's renters too, and I'm super glad we have something like this to really put into the process right now. And having said that, it's time. I mean, if you can even stand it, we have even more stuff coming your way, and really just as important, maybe more important. This is a featured session coming up. Permitting is one of the hottest topics in Virginia. Thank you all again, Hannah, Derek, Charlie, Yesenia, and Carrie. Charlie was just talking about this, the future's so bright, it's hard to see. It's so bright, they can't even talk about it. I mean, this is what's happening, such as a renaissance, such as a boom. And now it's details time of
Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.